Hello, all. I want to welcome you today to our Psalms class, our 10 weeks of online study of the book of Psalms. This is a short sort of syllabus review and discussion about a few things. And I wanted to point out to you that the Psalms are really one of the most widely read and studied and used sections of Scripture. And so we're going to be looking into something that probably is familiar to all of you on one level or another. One thing that I want to talk about today is approaches to the book of Psalms. And I personally have been really fond of looking at the Psalms as poetry. And the reason for that is summed up in C.S. Lewis' book introduction that he had for his book on the Psalms. And he says, "What must be said, however, is that the Psalms are poems, and poems intended to be sung, not doctrinal theses, nor even sermons. The Bible, since it is after all literature, cannot properly be read except as literature, and the different parts of it as different sorts of literature that they are. Most emphatically, the Psalms must be read as poems, as lyrics with all the licenses and all the formalities, the hyperboles, the emotional rather than logical connections, which are proper to lyric poetry." And this was from Lewis, as his own sort of approach to Psalms is his approach to scholastics, which was being a literary critic. Okay, so Lewis himself was an interesting character because he became a Christian apologist after he undertook his long career as a literary critic. So he has a lot to offer us in the sense of looking at Psalms as a literature or a literary creation. And that's one of the aspects that we're going to look at the book of Psalms through. So I wanted to point that out because we're going to be studying the Psalms, and we're going to be doing sort of an exegetical research paper. And so I want to turn back with you to the draft syllabus. Okay, the draft syllabus is a draft syllabus for one good reason, and that's because I'm still finding bits and pieces that need to be proofread. However, we do have all of the required reading and the required assignments, which have been approved of by our department. So this syllabus is actually in good shape. And if you go to your email box, you'll have a copy of the draft syllabus. Also, if you don't have an email in your email box at this point, you can go into the course announcements, where I also, first of all, posted that email with the syllabus attached to it. And that's not our final syllabus because I'm still finalizing some of the reading assignments, but it is sufficient to say that this is our guide for the term here. So if you go to your syllabus and look at the required reading, there are a few things in here that we'll look at really quickly. First of all is the idea that we're basing our study on the Scripture itself. We're looking at all 150 Psalms in modern English, and probably more than one go-round. So plan to keep these close. You can probably plan to read in more than one version if you so desire. Okay, the next thing I'd like to talk about is the idea that we're going to skip Anderson for a moment and look at this assigned passage by Craig Broyles. Actually, that's not the one I'd hoped to find there, but we have in your e-reserves is an e-reserve article by the same man, Craig Broyles, and it describes pretty much the process that we're going to go through in creating the exegetical paper. And so if you have had a chance to pull that up, you can open it up now. But I'd like to just talk to you a little bit about why we've picked out the books that are picked out, kind of in the same order that Broyles puts his study of Psalms in. And I've sort of made this into something called 10 Things About, because there are 10 different issues that we deal with when we do a good close reading or exegetical reading. We'll skip to the literary analysis that he mentions, and also that Lewis has talked about, and look carefully at the different things that are involved in a literary analysis. First of all, we want to look at structure. How is the poem structured? And then look at the content. What kinds of topics are discussed? Another point is the idea of genre. And genre is something I will be putting together a second lecture for you this week about genre and its relation to social setting for the writer of the poem in the beginning. How did that poet perhaps fit his work within his own social milieu, so to speak? And then there's some other sort of linguistic matters of styles, things like point of view and other kinds of things that we'll talk about a little bit more. But all of those things have to do with literary analysis, with looking at the text and examining it on its own terms. You have some suggest a reading or reading in e-reserves, by Robert Alter. And I'd like you to start with that this week, actually. He should be pages 1 to 73. So keep an eye out for when that becomes available. It was added a little bit later, so it will become available during this week. But I suggest that we do start there. And it's 2 sections in there, one about parallelism and then a second one about literary approaches to poetry. Now, the important thing with Alter is that he too is a literary critic, a literary reader of text. And so he's going to help us to focus on the literary characteristics of the text. Now, Lewis was a Christian apologist. Alter, I believe, is a Jewish person, but his Art of Biblical Poetry is much a standard textbook sort of thing for talking about style. Okay, so we want to think about keeping all of those things together as part of how we're going to look at our own particular psalm over the course of the term. The second part of this is the idea of doing a real close text analysis. In other words, looking at grammar, looking at figures of speech such as metaphor and metonymy, maybe doing a good word study where you dig in pretty far into one particular word. And those things also then contribute to a literary analysis of the text. So our focal point will be our text, and we'll keep an eye on the different things that are happening in there. In particular, I will take you through some more issues of genre as we move along, but that's something that's very much a part of Psalm study, so we want to keep that in mind. Okay. The next thing we want to do is look at the context. Where did this psalm come from? Where does it fit in the literary context of the entire book? Because the book is divided up into smaller sections, and it looks like this book has come together over a period of time. So we want to look at where, when you're reading your own psalm, where does it fit? Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, Book 4, Book 5, and what is the significance, of the different books, and what can those tell us then about other questions, such as historical context, sociological context, the idea of traditions in the text. Does your psalm talk about the Exodus, for example? And by that, we can then sort of reach out and look for some extra biblical information about the text. And I have a good book that I'll recommend for you. It's not on this list per se, but it does help to place some of these issues into a greater ancient Near Eastern context. Okay, after all of that is done, we've kind of looked at all those things together. We'll go and look at the idea of theological import. Okay, so we want to give the text a full say before we begin to dig into theology, how we might make it an application for a church, for example, or for our own life, and then biblical and theological ideas. Okay, so those things are going to arise in our reading, in our close reading, literary analysis, and then become more obvious perhaps as we begin to look at some of them are quite intricate structures and so forth. Okay, then another interesting facet of this will be looking at some secondary literature. One thing that I'm really fascinated with personally is the history of interpretation. So I've assigned you 2 different things that are going to help us to see how the Psalms have arisen, but then how they've been interpreted over a period of time. And the one book that I've asked you to get is the book by Susan Gillingham, The Psalms Through the Centuries, and it's the first volume. She has organized material into 5 basic time frames, both as Jewish interpretation, Christian interpretation, and then subdivided that into more topics. So you'll have a really good sort of book to look at to see how other people have read the Psalms over the course of time, and it's very interesting to kind of peel back some of those layers and look. For example, how does the Greek Orthodox Church read the Psalms? It's a little different than maybe you would expect. How do liturgical churches use the Psalms, and have they been used that way over a course of time? So Gillingham's book, while it may not be your first go-to book, it's going to be really useful for helping to put things into sort of a chronological order, not of when the psalm was written, but of the history of interpretation. Who else has read this psalm before we got there? And what did they make of it? How did this actually kind of make sense to various people over time? And our final goal, of course, is going to be actualizing the psalm into our own life. And it seems that Broyles goes in kind of a circle because he has you start by carefully reading the psalm and then meditating and thinking about it. So your psalm that you pick out from the book of Psalms to work on all term is going to become a good friend. You're going to find out not only a lot about it, but a lot about how it can help to form your ideas of God and help to form your ideas theologically speaking, and then how you can take that and turn it over to somebody else and help them to kind of think about what is being said there about God. So those are the 10 things about, and a little bit more about how those fit together. One thing that we'll do cautiously, and that is to look at some of the Psalms through that very earliest interpretation. How did the New Testament authors, reuse the Psalms? How did they talk about the Psalms being used by Jesus, for example? Or how did they reuse it into their own text? And that's a fascinating thing to look at. Anytime you see Old Testament allusions or quotations brought to the new, it lets us know how those very earliest Christian authors viewed the scripture and how it then sort of got changed with their idea of what happened after Jesus came. How did Jesus' life and work affect the way we see Old Testament text? And that begins right in the front part or second part of our Bible in the New Testament. Okay, so one interesting book that I also have assigned is the one by Moise and Mencken, The Psalms in the New Testament. And the way we're going to use that is to read the introduction together. And then when you've decided which psalm you want to work on, I want you to go in there and find the chapter that's appropriate. Okay, so if you're it kind of goes in New Testament order. So if your psalm is reused in the book of, say, the book of Acts, you'll want to go in there and see how did the author of the book of Acts reuse that text and incorporate it into our New Testament scripture, because now we have these incorporated not only in the Old Testament, but now in the New as well. So there are many, many layers to this, and it gets really interesting to see how those New Testament authors made good use of what they already had at hand. Okay, so that one fits in there as well. One comment I want to make about the required reading list is that items that are listed in bold print are available as ebooks. So that's I tried to put a lot of those in there because I know that sometimes it gets a little overwhelming to have to run out and buy 5 brand new books, unless you're like me and then you like to go out and buy 5 brand new books. But sometimes it's nice to have them available as ebooks, and then you can kind of save up some cash for something else that you might want to use for class or whatever, another book for another class even. So I wanted to try to make that as easy as possible for you, and therefore you can go in there and find the ebooks in the Fuller Library. If you have any problem with that, email me and I will try to help you out as far as how to get into the Fuller Library and how to get into the ebooks. I've been able to search them by name and by author, so that's probably what you'll need to do. I think there's a search function for ISBN as well, so you could try that as well. Okay. We also have quite a good list of things in eReserves, and I've put also some of the suggested reading in there, so there's quite a long list. Some of the required articles will be coming up here as soon as the librarians get at them, which should be quite soon. And you can find all the required ones by clicking on the search word at the very top of the library list. So when you're in there, you'll see some different kinds of words and different sizes. And the ones I've put in that are required, I've put as a tag required. So you can click on that and I'll sort those all out so you'll just see the required ones. The other ones are good ones and very useful to read and maybe give you some more ideas, but you don't necessarily have to read them. So that's one way you can sort out A from B. Okay, so those are all things I wanted to get started on with you today. I hope you have had a really nice Easter. We've been busy with family and having kind of a pleasant time. I will be putting together the remainder of the reading list and send that out to you as a non-draft form of the syllabus. I'll put it both into the class at the top of the page where it belongs, and I will send it out as a course announcement, which means that you'll have that in your email box. And it will also then be residing at the top of the page under course announcements. So that place, course announcements, is where I say lots and lots of things over the course of the term. And so if you ever think, I think the professor said A, B, or C. You'll probably be able to find it in the course announcements because that is kind of the ongoing place to be putting new things. So I would encourage you to go ahead and get started reading this week's Psalms 1 to 15. Particularly look at 1 and 2 because I'll be giving you that as part of my lecture coming up here in the week. And we'll have also one of the most interesting and fun of the assignments is to go in and kind of find the forum and then fill out the form for introductions. So please feel free to say as much or as little as you like about yourself in the introductions. You can put pictures, that's always fun. And let us know if there's any sorts of things that you want prayed for over the course of the term or not. Feel completely free. Those items within our class are only seen by us, so you don't need to worry about any other students seeing what you put in there. And I try to keep that as closed just for this particular class, so you can feel very comfortable that what you share in the introduction only goes as far as myself and your other classmates. So please do take some time to do that. That's our sort of foray into finding forums, although I suspect many of you have already had an online class. If you haven't, it does take a little bit of work to find your way around in the course. So I believe I have also included a how to get around in the course video that I did for another class. And it may be a little bit dated because I think our course format changed a tiny bit, but it does give you an idea how to move around in Moodle. Please remember, I'm always available. I check my email all the time. I'm sort of on the phone and kind of addicted to it. So email anytime that you like. If you have a question that's of concern for the whole class, go ahead and use the course questions forum. If you have a theological concern, you've read something and it kind of went, whoa, my apple cart's upset, go ahead and please feel free to write in the, oh my gosh, forum that I think is in there. I think I called it the Say What forum. And we had good times with that in Pentateuch class. I'll tell you, that was a real hot spot. But for Psalms as well, there are going to be some things that are going to come up and you go, what? I never heard that before. I never understood that before. What's going on with that? So that'll be a fun place for us to look. For right now, I think I will say goodbye, but I will be posting during the week and I'll let you know when new things go up. As far as things that are due this week, we'll have our reading to do and the introduction forum. And I believe that's all for written work. So this is a really good week to get into your books, find your pages, find the stuff that you want to read. And also the last thing will be choosing a psalm. So let me just say a little bit about that. I think I've already written to you about that in the introduction when I sent out the syllabus. However, the thing you want to keep in mind is that we'll be deep studying 12 to 16 verses. So please do feel free to pick any psalm you like. If it's a psalm that's really short, like 117, I might ask you to do a little bit more. If it's a psalm that's really, really long, like 119, you'll probably want to choose one or two of those sections because that's a very, very long one. And I'm asking you not to do 23 because we'll want to use that as part of a classroom project that we're going to do. So we're going to leave that one out of the mix. So you get any of the other 149. You can pick one that's a nice length to start with, 12 to 16 verses, or you can go ahead and kind of look through if you might have some favorite that's a little longer. And then the task will be to focus in on just one larger section of that. So any questions on that, we'll continue to discuss that during this week. And that's kind of part of what we want to see accomplished by the end of this coming up week. Other than that, please do get with me if you have any other questions, and I'll look forward to meeting each one of you over the course of the term. Bye now.